Hello, video production class. It's Mr. McCarthy coming at you from the third video for today's class. So you should have watched my first recording before looking at this. And secondly, I asked you to watch the Big Vinny video. So if you haven't done that yet, please do that before you take a look at this video. Okay? In addition to those three videos, there should be a link to this PDF. This comes from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. If you recall, last week you guys took a look at a TED presentation from Scott McCloud where he discussed comics, the evolution of comics, and how comics are changing within the digital age. He wrote a book called Understanding Comics, and in that book, he identifies 6 different types of sequences that comic book artists create for comic books. Okay? And although I'm not somebody who reads graphic novels, I don't read comics. It's never been my thing. This book was recommended to me, and what I found fascinating about this book was the fact that much of what comic book artists do in creating individual panels to communicate translates to some degree to video. And I'm going to try and demonstrate that by discussing these 6 types of organizational patterns that comic book artists use. Okay? So follow along. I'm going to zoom in on this. We're going to talk about these one at a time. And so here we go. This is Scott McCloud's representation of himself, speaking directly to the reading audience. And for number 1, I'll just read this. It says, most panel to panel, but what he means by panel, this is the panel here, going to another panel. Most panel to panel transitions in comics can be placed in one of several distinct categories. The first category, which we'll call moment to moment, requires very little closure. I'll talk about closure in just a moment. I just want to talk about the difference between this panel and this panel. What we see is a woman. In the second panel, a woman whose eyes are closed. She's probably in the act of blinking or in the act of thinking. Okay, so we move from one moment to another moment. In this third example here, looks like the planet Saturn. We're moving moment to moment, and in doing so, it appears as if we're approaching closer to that planet. So there's a progression of movement here, one moment to the next. In this third example here, we have somebody that's asleep, their mouth open, and I can almost hear him snoring. And what we see is a spider on the bed, and the spider just simply moves closer to that person's head. So the moment to moment is nothing really changes except the movement of that spider. If we think in terms of video, these types of shots are created without any editing. You simply turn the camera on, push record, and these are the types of this is the type of footage that we capture. Comic book artists don't have it so easy. They have to draw panels one at a time. With video, we just simply record. Okay? So the first type of sequences within comics, or movement within comics, is just moment to moment. Let's take a look at this next one. It's called action to action. And it's very similar to moment, but let's take a look. It says, next are the transitions featuring a single subject and distinct action-to-action progression. So let's take a look. Here's a baseball player. We see the ball coming. There's the action. He hits the ball. The next, we see a close-up of a drink being poured. Looks like it might be champagne. In the second, somebody taking a sip. And the action is a large belch or burp here. In the third panel, we see a car moving very quickly. We can tell by the lines, and then suddenly it crashes. So the action here is the crash. The action here is multifold: pouring of a drink, the drinking of the drink, the burp at the end. Here we have a baseball player who's waiting the baseball, and he gets a hit. So for action to action, we see something actually happening. I want you to think about the video that we looked at last week that dealt with sequences where the woman was in the kitchen making scrambled eggs. And Drew Keller asked us to consider peak moments. What are the peak moments for somebody scrambling the eggs? There's the establishing scene where she walks into the kitchen. We see the hand on the refrigerator handle opening the door. We see the pots and pans coming out of the cabinets. We see the crack of the egg. We see the scramble. You get my point. Peak moments. Notice that in action to action here, that's what's being featured. Peak moments of action. We compare that to here. Peak moments aren't necessarily here. It's just footage. Moment to moment, things are moving. Here, it's a little bit more involved. We see the result of panels. Okay? All right. Third panel here. Moving over. These are subject to subject. So notice what's happening here. In subject to subject, we stay within a scene or an idea, and then there's a greater degree of reader involvement necessary to render these transitions meaningful. So what are we talking about here? This first panel, we see somebody coming at this guy with an axe. He looks very frightened. This guy looks very mean. He says, "Now you die." And this person's saying, "No, no." In the second panel, we see this scream into the night. So what does this mean? I think most people realize that the scream is coming from this guy, and he's in the act of being chopped up. Forgive the crudeness of all that. How do we know that that's the case? Well, we bring our own funding. We can tell something's about to happen here. All we need to hear is the sound of a scream, and we get the result. Let's look at a different example here. See this man saying, "What more could go wrong?" And she says, apparently in reply, because she's facing him, "Well, at least Jerry never called." And then the phone rings. Who's on the phone? Right, Jerry's on the phone. These two panels set up the third. What could go wrong? Well, at least Jerry never called, right? And then the phone rings, somebody's calling. The reader is left to deduce that it is Jerry calling. Okay? We see a runner coming across the finish line, cuts to a stopwatch in somebody's hand. What's the relationship? This person's been timed, and this is the result of their race. Okay? So this is what we would call it up there. This is what we would call, I'm looking for it, subject to subject. Okay? In our fourth panel, scene to scene is what we're working with. Okay, so let's take a look at scene to scene. Scene to scene transports us across significant distances of time and space. Okay, and it involves more reader involvement. So 2 panels. We see this guy that looks like a detective or a cop saying he can't outrun us forever. Second panel, 10 years later. So what do we learn from this? What's the story? Well, the story is this detective is saying, I'm after this guy. He can't outrun us forever. The indicator here is forever. This is a time indicator. We have time here, 10 years later. What's the suggestion? Well, maybe he was right. The guy couldn't outrun him forever. 10 years later, they're about to find him, and that's where he's at. Okay? So again, we're dealing with scene to scene distances across time and space. In this case, for number 2, it's distances across space. So this is much more simple than the first one. Here's Bombay, India, Paris, New York. So we see a similarity within this largely informational series of panels, different places in the world. Let's take a look at this third one. There's a man consoling a woman. No one could have survived that crash. She's like, "You're right." The second panel, meanwhile. So this is the same time, because meanwhile indicates it's happening at the same time, but they're obviously in 2 very different places. What's this guy doing? He's sitting on an island. Why is he sitting on an island? Because he's the guy that survived the crash. Okay? And you might say, well, not necessarily. Then my response would be, the comic book artist placed these two panels together for a reason. The comic book artist is trying to communicate, to create a story, and in this panel, the idea that a crash has taken place and that nobody could have survived it. Then the next panel, we see a survivor on a desert island. We realize that they are wrong. Somebody actually did survive that. Okay, so notice that as readers, we have to bring that type of funding to the to those two panels. Okay. Next, we're going to go to number 5. If I can get this to move up quickly enough. Woo! Hello. All right. So for number 5, we are dealing with what's called aspect to aspect. Aspect to aspect bypasses time, so it's not really an indicator. I'm sorry, let me read that again. A 5th type of transition, which we'll call aspect to aspect, bypasses time for the most part and sets a wandering eye on different aspects of a place, idea, or mood. So we're talking about a wandering eye. So when our eye wanders over these two panels, one word comes to my mind, and it should come to your mind too if you're familiar with American culture. And the idea that comes to mind is Christmas. Christmas tree with presents, Santa Claus, these two things add up to one idea, Christmas. If we take a look at the next set of panels, go ahead. What do these 3 add up to? I see a sunny day. It's reinforced by the fact that somebody's looking up with sunglasses on. And then we see another image of the sky with birds there. This could mean a variety of different things. Summer day, sunny day, pleasant day. Okay, these 3 things add up to that one idea. This third panel, we see crushed beer cans, a cigarette, and an ashtray. It's not a very pretty picture. I can almost smell it. I go to the next panel. I can almost smell this too. Notice that the smoke seems to be rising in the background of these two. This guy kind of looks a little bit slovenly. She doesn't appear too happy. So what do these 2 things add up to? In my opinion, bad party. Bad alcohol party. I don't advise it. Okay? Stay away. So again, for number 5, aspect to aspect, wandering eye. It's kind of like an establishing shot. The only difference is an establishing shot is far away. It's one shot only. And we get a chance to see the scene. Here, the comic book artist and the video artist gets the opportunity to show you a variety of different clips that likewise establish the scene by providing a wandering eye to the place that that the video or film is going to take place. Okay? 6th one, non sequitur. You may realize the word sequence in sequitur. So non sequitur basically means that there is no sequence, that one image or one panel does not relate to the next. Okay, so we see a satellite flying around, then we go to this famous painting called American Gothic. They don't really relate. There's no sequence. Okay, we go to the next one, cheese, a tree, fish. They don't relate. And then finally, we see a political figure, looks like Richard Nixon, followed by an abstract art. There is no sequence there. It's a non sequitur. Okay? So these are 6 types of, or 6 ways of communicating through comic book. Okay? And these are also 6 ways in which video can be used to communicate with an audience. Notice that number 1 requires very little editing. Number 2, action to action. These are sequences in its most basic form. And then we see different ways in which putting together footage can communicate different things. Okay, are we good? All right, here's your assignment. Actually, your first assignment is to think back on Big Vinny and ask yourself which of 3, 4, 5, or 6 applies to Big Vinny. Okay, so I want you to think about that. I'd like you to review this document, and on a separate piece of paper, I certainly hope you're still listening to this video and watching. On a separate piece of paper, I would like you to write the answer to question number 1. Which of these transition patterns apply best to the video Big Vinny? All right? And once you have identified that, what I would like you to do is I would like you to go to filmminute.com and I would like you to identify videos, identify videos that follow that pattern. Notice that I just went to previous winners. If I, let's see, how do we look at all of the videos on here? Okay, so I'm just going to select this one and notice films 2015. So if I erase the title here, I get the full list of videos that were submitted for that year. And then if I go and replace 2015 with 2014, we get the full list or archive of videos that were submitted for that year. Okay? So your assignment today is to do this, to find 2 videos in which you can identify some of these patterns. Okay? And the first thing I would like you to do, I'm going to type this out if I can. There's my lesson plan for today. So for number 1, okay, and you can just write it there on a separate piece of paper. For number 2, what I would like you to do is okay. So the first thing I'd like you to do on filmminute.com, find a video, then describe or summarize that video. So what takes place? Tell us what the plot is, and then tell us the pattern you recognize. By pattern, I mean one of these patterns. Let's not bother with 1 and 2, because these are a little bit too simple and straightforward. I want you to see if you can identify subject to subject, scene to scene, or aspect to aspect. If you look at the film M-22, not sure what year that comes from, you'll notice some non sequiturs in there. So sometimes this abstract form of video does work. Okay? So that is your full total of assignments for today. If you complete that handwritten assignment, I want you to hold on to it. If you do not, that is your homework. I look forward to seeing that on Thursday along with your bright and smiling face. Okay? This is Mr. McCarthy signing off.